So today's episode is all about ITAM process and governance. Both Rory and Kylie have arguably been leading when it comes to ITAM governance. They've built DIY process kits, they've written countless white papers, and have been heavily involved in building the ISO standard, which is the gold standard for ITAM services to follow. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank
Hi.
you, Sean.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks for having us.
No problem. And so why does having a clear ITAM process matter?
Do you want to go first, Kylie?
So I think the thing about processes is that everything, if you want to achieve results at one end of, say, an asset lifecycle, you need to be managing those assets all the way from when you acquire them right through their use to when they're no longer valid. There may be, you may have upgraded or whatever. You need to manage them throughout that life cycle, and it's process that pushes your assets through their life cycle. So each time an asset moves, say, from, being purchased to being in use to being upgraded or whatever, it's actually processes that push that change. So unless you have your processes well documented and understood, you're not going to be able to track your assets as they move through those different changes, as they go through their life cycle. And you're going to start losing assets, you're going to start losing control. So having controlled, established, documented processes really gives you the ability to standardize everything, and therefore you're not going to lose assets, you're not going to lose control of them, you're not going to lose an understanding of what they are or where they are or what they're doing. So that's why process is important. It's because it's the driver of your assets as they move.
So how did you guys come together then? Because obviously you haven't always worked together. You've had your own separate companies providing similar services. So what was the idea that kind of got you both to start working together?
It started sort of me covering Kylie way back when she needed extended coverage on a particular 8-week sabbatical she wanted to take. And from there, we were in sort of monthly or weekly contact just on the topic of IT asset management. And then I'd started producing Process of the Month for ITAM Review, which formed the backbone really of the process kit then that later got produced. And Kylie approached me, I'm trying to think when it was, but I can't remember the year, and said, you don't really have anything around hardware processes. And I didn't. So we set about creating the hardware process kit. And it's just spawned from there really then at that point, and off the back of us not killing each other in that experience. I was very Gollum-like about it all. It was like, my kit. It was then a case of, well, okay, let's refresh the software processes so that they're in line with ISO 19770. And for all the world, I thought, well, that'll be a 6-week sprint. And it took about 2 years because we were just chipping away at it. We had our day jobs to do, as it were.
Yep.
But now I'm just immensely proud of it and very grateful that Kylie sort of came up with the idea to do the ham and then do the SAM refresh, and that takes us to where we are now, which is the cloud process kit as well that we're in the middle of working on.
Yeah.
Okay.
You notice, actually, I think it's a theme of our relationship that Rory has the ideas and I'm the execution person. So, Rory had the idea to start writing down these processes and make a kit that people could take advantage of and use themselves to as a starting point for their own processes. And then I sort of said, we could do this and this and this, and sort of picked it up, and the two of us have run with it. But really, it is more often than not, it's Rory who has the bright idea, not me.
Yeah.
And then I just say, right, let's pick it up and run with it. So I think we've been doing process kits just in our own time, maybe an hour or 2 hours a week, probably for about 10 years, Rory.
Yeah, I'd say.
That's mad, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
brilliant.
Yeah. And then when we get the cloud kit done, we probably there'll be a new version of ISO 19770 out. So we'll need to refresh the other versions to make sure that they align with the new version of 770, which will.
Yeah, can't wait.
But as you were both kind of front and center of doing that, I'm sure it kind of comes second nature, because as you're thinking about how to implement, or rather coach someone on the process, you're obviously thinking about the standard that you helped create. So the two people, the team behind it, certainly well placed to do so. So
Yeah.
might not be as difficult for you as it would be for other people to do so.
Well, let's hope not.
So to help the listeners relate, can you explain, I guess, the top 3 issues that you found either?
Well, the big one I'm grappling with at the moment is how you build IT asset management when you don't necessarily have effective IT service management processes. It's actually being really interesting. You know, obviously an organization operates and it's, and can be very, very successful. So they are doing service management, but they're not doing it in, I guess, for want of a better way of putting it, an ITIL focused approach. And so I'm really grappling at the moment with how we insert I'm doing hardware asset management activities into ITSM workflows that aren't well documented. So everybody knows what they're doing, and I tell you, the operation, it works, but we don't have documented those ITSM workflows. And so we're finding that we trip over ourselves as we're trying to, build out certain hardware asset management activities. We're having to do, rather than just almost opening up the ITSM process and saying, right, at this point you need to, X is going to happen. And in an ideal world, it would all be automated, right? If you close a call, if you've got a deployment call and say a laptop's being deployed to this individual, then you close the call. And then you can also see that the laptop, that the individual has logged into the laptop, then those two things together should be enough for you to say, okay, this person has the laptop. And so you can update the laptop and update the ownership, etc. But if those processes aren't documented very well, then it can be really difficult to think, well, where do you automate that that update, for instance, because you just don't have clarity around what those ITSM workflows are doing. So it's very interesting, actually, for the first time in my life, really, I'm coming up against this issue that other people's processes aren't well documented, and that's impacting my ability to implement my own well documented processes. So that's very interesting.
I mean, ITAM and ITSM do have crossovers, for sure. So as individuals, are you grabbing the ITSM division and telling them what to do, and create a process to bring them back to enable you to do your job, or what's the typical ITAM Accelerate solution?
So I think realistically, ITAM will always be subservient to service management, and Rory's going to have a shudder going up and down his back. But that's the reality, because actually, if you need to deploy something, even as something as simple as a laptop, there's a load of steps associated with that are the steps that are pushing that laptop through its life cycle. So you have to purchase the laptop, so that's procurement. You have to build the laptop, so you have to receive it. So that's HAM. Right, we've received a laptop. Woohoo, HAM. Then you have to build the laptop. Well, that's not really HAM, is it? Then you have to, well, there's a load of approvals in there as well, which is not really HAM. They're request fulfillment. Then it has to be built. So that's, sort of operations in there, IMAC processes. Then you finally hand it physically over to your end user. Then your end user needs to log in, and then they need to start using it. And it's only once they start using it, so that end-to-end, I have a request for a laptop, to I'm actually sitting and using it and working on it. That's the value stream. And HAM needs to just be picking up and capturing when that value stream results in a change of life cycle state, or a change of ownership, or a change of whatever. but we don't actually care about whether the laptop's built or whatever, because that's the service is that end-to-end, let's get that laptop out there being used. So from a hand perspective, and we've always known this, when we write these process kits, you're telling a story about how something moves through its life cycle. And I'm going to be talking about hardware a lot, because that's what I'm working on at the moment. You're talking about something moving through its life cycle, but actually the activities that are pushing it through its life cycle, a lot of the time are not us. So you do need to have a very collaborative approach with the operations teams and the service management teams who are actually doing the work of pushing it through the life cycle to capture when those changes are occurring. And it's most obvious with hardware, but it's exactly the same with software as well. So it's always this, and especially when we're writing these hardware processes, it's always a bit of a toss-up. How many of the IT service management steps do you include in a process, even though they're not ours? Because otherwise you're not seeing the full story. All you're seeing is a laptop moved, rather than the full story of actually the whole point of doing this is so that somebody can sit down and start working on that laptop.
Yeah. So just to leap in there, Sean, as well, one thing I'd be doing if I was in Kylie's position or anybody else's, and you're looking to blend ITAM and ITSM processes, within the kit, we have a data and entity attribute tracker. And what I would be doing is sitting down with the ITSM people and saying, model your processes to our standards. And at that point, you call out the data, you call out the entities and the attributes that are moving in an ITSM world. And then you can start to filter on those data and entity attributes. And you can see where data goes and those entities move from ITSM to ITAM and back again.
Perfect. See, the kit for it. The ITAM Accelerate has a kit for it.
We
the
do,
solution is here.
Yeah. So it's things like, well, there's a request raised for something. Yep. So the request, you can look at, say, a service request in the entity tracker and see that that's raised by an end user. You can then see the next step that request goes through. Is it gets to the operations teams, then the laptop gets delivered to somebody. Then the request should be closed, but we're not closing the request because we're not ITAM. So in fact, a lot of the time, it's interesting when you walk through that entity tracker that we might create entities like requests or purchase orders or whatever, but actually we rarely close them and we rarely archive them. And that's because they have a life beyond ITAM, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah. Linking in a previous conversation with David Foxon, where he was explaining how COVID, a lot of people were buying new hardware or trying to implement a hardware process. We're obviously now in that 4 or 5 year cycle where hardware is potentially reaching the end of its life. Is that why the two of you are seeing a little bit more hardware focused?
I think hardware goes in cycles, actually. My previous hardware asset management role was 2006 to 2009, and we know what happened in 2009 or 2008. And then I think everyone's hardware asset management sort of collapsed, because the thing about hardware asset management is it's expensive, it's time consuming, it's boring, nobody wants to do it. So if you can skimp on it, you will, because it's just a nightmare. It's a pain. Yep. So I think it had it had a big trough from around 2008, 2009, all the way through to COVID, and then suddenly all the hardware shortages made people think, oh, whoa, hang on. But I think the other thing that's happening is there is a lot of push by regulators, particularly in the financial industry, around resilience, and the regulators are going out to their regulated organizations and saying, look, you can't be resilient unless you know what your hardware is out there. And so I think the COVID shock definitely made people think about, whoa, hang on, maybe we need to get a better grip on our hardware, in the sense of we've suddenly realized what happens if it's a struggle to get hold of it. But I think the ongoing momentum is because of the resilience that this resilience push. So DORA in the EU, and then all the various, there's a number of different regulations and things in the States that are, and the UK as well, that are pushing through this emphasis on resilience. So I think there's that too. And then the other thing as well, of course, is and it's been something that has been bubbling away for a long time. But of course, we've got a lot more emphasis on data security and data protection. And again, you have regulators saying, look, if you don't know what hardware you have, then you cannot protect your data as well. So I think, there's a number of things that have contributed to that swell of actually, it's worthwhile investing in our hardware asset management.
I think it's interesting too to look at the roots of where that sort of drive for a protection of personally identifiable information is coming from with regards to the US as well. And it's the reputation of organizations and their share price on the New York Stock Exchange. So the Securities and Exchanges Commission are fairly beating a drum at the moment because they don't want another Enron. They another reason to raise Sarbanes-Oxley-like legislation after the fact. So it's quite interesting to see that they're trying to offset the some sort of big explosion around the loss of personal data for a given organization.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And again, going back to the process kit, if you have it all documented, then at any one point you can, if followed, we'll be able to pinpoint where the hardware is and who's using it, or rather who's dropped it in because of they've left the company. So it's the leavers process. So yeah, excellent. I mean, actually, that reminds me of a story, Rory, from someone who used your kit, from the old customers, and he actually ended up finding, or rather pinpointing, someone who was stealing laptops from a warehouse because of the process that he implemented years before and continued to follow, and obviously was figuring out what happened. So obviously it saves money, it stops theft. It also creates that air of security around the data. So ticking all the boxes if you have the right processes, for sure. One of the conversations I have with customers is they'll say, "Oh, I'm either working on HAM or I'm working on SAM," and they don't focus on the two together.
I think I'm having flashbacks, and we quote this in the kit as well. Before I started in IT, I had a dalliance of a career with the Royal Navy. And I was going through basic training, and one of the things that one of the instructors, we did emergency training around holes in ships and saving the ship, because if you're at sea, if there's a fire on land, life is the primary priority. If you're at sea, it's the ship, because if the ship goes down, everybody goes down. So with that in mind, the instructor said, you've got holes here, here, and here. Theoretically, he said, which one do you tackle first? And he asked me, and I went straight away, the deck. Any holes in the deck? Because I figure if water's coming up, you can't see it, therefore, it's a problem. Yeah, it's not a bad answer, but he said it's a more obvious answer, and it's the one that's letting in the most water. So that should be, and that is a risk-based approach then at that point, and that is what you should be doing in SAM or HAM or ITAM or Cloud, is plugging the biggest holes, and then take a Six Sigma approach and just chip away at the biggest stuff and work your way down from there.
Sure. And I guess it's also down to budget as well, because not every company will have the resource, I suppose. So to use that analogy you did, you're working within your means to plug the biggest holes to stop the ship sinking.
Yeah, and equally too, not everybody is going to be that captain of industry that can say plug that hole there and get 5 people on it and make it happen. You've got to work within your means, like you say. So if the biggest hole you can plug is the request process or the joiners, movers, leavers process, because it doesn't necessarily have a heavy weight on technology that you then have to buy specifically for SAM, then go for it. Then that's an approach or a way forward.
Okay. Yeah, and I think funding for ITAM is almost always risk-driven and crisis-driven. So if you have a crisis around your hardware asset management, you're going to fund that. If you have a crisis around your software, you're going to fund that. So I think this is why it always feels so unbalanced and why there's always an emphasis on one thing over the other. But I think as a practitioner, you need to be aware of and manage that tendency to overcorrect as a result of a crisis. I always think that there's three main drivers for IT asset management, and it's irrespective of what form of asset management. One is the funding issue. You need to save money. You need to minimize the amount of money that you're spending. The other one is information data security. You don't want any data leaks. You need to secure those, and you can't secure those unless you know what it is, where your vulnerabilities are. And to do that, you have to know what software and hardware you're running. And then the final one is not as obvious to a lot of people, but it's actually that ability to provide that service. And most organizations will have, of those three priorities, will have an overriding priority, and the other two are tangential, because you can do two. Most organizations can manage two things at once, but the third thing goes out the window. And of those two things, one will be a higher priority in the majority of cases. And you need to understand the organization that you are working with. What is the highest priority? And that is often not necessarily what is communicated to you. The number of IT asset managers who I've spoken to who've said, oh, we've got to save money, we've got to be really restrictive about what assets we give out. And they work for a law firm, or they work for, in the finance industry. They're being told it's about money, but actually, no, it's going to be about customer service. It's going to be about being agile, being able to be responsive to the needs of business and to the needs of the people who are actually the money makers and bringing the money in. If you try and clamp down and say, no, you can't have that piece of software because it's too expensive, then all you're going to do is build up resentment, and eventually you're going to lose your job. Even though people are saying, you've got to save money, actually, you need to think about the bigger picture. On the other hand, I've worked in very, very low margin organizations. So, we're talking 1-2% margin here. And so that really does come down to money, because a large bill can really have an impact on the bottom line. £1 million, if you're on a 2% in a 2% margin business and you have £1 million bill, you have to bring in an extra £50 million in revenue to cover that unexpected bill. That is a business killer. That's an existential threat. So that if you're in an organization like that, you really do worry about money, and the information security and the customer service are secondary, because actually, if you do get an unexpected $1 million bill from Oracle or Microsoft or whoever, it's really going to put the business at risk. And of course, if you're in, a highly regulated industry like the banking industry or health, etc., then information security suddenly becomes the highest priority. You're going to spend a bit more money to keep things secure and safe, and you're going to slow things down in order to make sure that you're not letting anything dangerous into your environment. So you've really got to take that step back as a practitioner and think about what are the business conditions that your organization operates in. And sure, you have to take into account what your boss is saying about, saving money or information security or whatever, but actually you also need to think, what's the real drivers behind this? Am I the only person in the company that's being asked to save money? Well, there's probably a reason for that. In which case, maybe don't be quite so focused on it. Let it go a little bit and recognize that it isn't actually the primary objective of your business.
Yep. And so the process kit, given that this is the way that you see how SAM and ITAM should be performed, that it's not a case of just taking something away and plugging a gap. It's looking at the bigger picture and the business outcome, which is profitability and making money. So within the process kit,
your business, Sean, because of course health, it depends on, you've got to remember as well, it depends on your business. So, health or if you work in the public sector, you're going to have different measures of success than money.
And so on that note, within the process kit, can you kind of stack certain things as a priority above others, and so you can personalize it to, say, that said company's priority, healthcare's company, financial institution, and so there is. Okay, brilliant.
Yeah, because what we've got suggested critical success factors and key performance indicators in there as well. But there's no reason why you can't come up with your own to justify the existence of the processes or add to them. There'll always be a core SAM element to it, which is about sort of compliance and cost optimization. But if you've got an adjacent KPI that supports information security, they tend to sort of leap off the page fairly quickly when you put your mind to it.
Yeah, and I think you've got to remember that the processes are templates. And nobody ever takes a template and then hands that in as their homework. You're going to fail, right?
Yep.
So you have to take those templates and you have to think about how those templates apply to your organization.
Mm-hmm.
And then the whole point of them is that you then change them.
Mm-hmm.
So the processes are in Visio, and we have a Visio stencil that is downloadable with the kit as well. And so people can actually literally go into Visio and start playing around with those processes, moving boxes, adding in new boxes, changing the roles and responsibilities so that they're the roles that exist in your organization. If you've got different names for different entities and data things, then you change them so that they reflect what is in your organization. That's the whole point of these. If you were to start from scratch, it would take you a very, very long time to think through what is required, but also you're probably going to miss stuff. So what we've done is we've given you that baseline that says, okay, here's a foundation for you to build off. We've done that heavy lifting over the years because we've got so much experience in real organizations. We've done the heavy lifting of saying, okay, this is what happens in real organizations, and this is the best practice that we've seen. This is what we see coming in 19770, which of course is, global best practice. It's not just us. And this is how, so you're not going to forget things because we've included all the really important stuff. But then from there, you then go and you add whatever is needed for your organization. And also, if you look at something and say, you know what, this is not really that important for us. It's not a priority. It's expensive, or I've been told that it's going to be interfere too much with getting a software out to the partners. So we're going to skip that step. Skip that step. It's not the end of the world. You need to do what is right for your organization. So just skip that step. And there's a risk management process. When you skip the step, you write in your risk register, we skipped this step because of X, Y, and Z. And, you've got it documented that there was a reason why you didn't include that step. Bob's your uncle. Okay. That's how you should be working. So it's not about, so you absolutely have to change these processes so that they work for your organization. These are very much template vanilla. We had the perfect organization in our head that had no money issues, that was totally focused around information security, and it was absolutely going to provide the highest levels of service that you possibly could. It's not real world.
So it takes that kind of critical thinking. So this is best placed in hands of a ITAM SME who is literate in as not someone who's just kind of come into the organization and who's using your tools as a guide. They need to have a background and experience in.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. But I think also the fact that everything is in there does mean that somebody who's less experienced can come and use them as a basis. So if we think about what our customers do with them, we've had some customers who've used them to provide the foundation for achieving.
Yep.
Another customer, actually, they had already had established processes. So they walked through the kit to do a gap analysis between their current established processes and what was in the kit. Had people start building processes based on what's in the kit. So using the information in the kit to be able to say to their senior managers, okay, we need to do X, Y, and Z, and this is how we should be doing it. And here is the kit to help us evidence what's required. How else have we seen people use the kit, Rory?
If I had somebody from be introduced to me at a conference, at an ITAM conference in London, and I said, "Hi, I'm Rory. I've written this process kit." And she goes, "Oh, you're the process guy." She said, "We've just used your processes and they work," which I don't mind saying is it's like Ferrari winning a race with your engine, because would fully expect to go, "But look, here you are, guys.
Yep.
Here's our repository of knowledge and wisdom as we apply it to your solution." But then they ran with the version that we had. So, and we have all, there's at least one other consultancy I can think of in the UK that license the kit so that they take that then to their clients to say, "Oh, you've got a problem here, here, and here. We can spot weld. We can apply this process or that process to where you are currently, and we can get you further down the maturity path as well." So we're fully on board for those kind of engagements as well. So if any consultancies out there looking to fast track their SAM and ITAM services, please feel free to reach out.
Yeah, perfect. That's a great example, and obviously having a Big Four using your knowledge is, as you say, I like that analogy, like a Ferrari using your engine. And I'm surprised you didn't have their logo or a version of their logo on your car, Rory, because why not? Obviously, having the two man and woman band that you are, it doesn't take a large company, a large brand to be able to provide value, does it? And so certainly having the knowledge, having the experience, and having the ideas is more important. So you have the ITAM process kit, both for the HAM, SAM, and obviously working on the cloud. You also have a automated maturity assessment, which you've actually done with licenseware, on top of the consultancy that you provide independently, but also alongside the process kit where people need a bit of assistance, kind of a helping hand. Am I missing any other services that you offer?
Yeah, there's a 2-day package that we run presently under the SAM Charter banner called a SAM Surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a concentrated experience for an organization. And what we'll do is day one, we'll take them through a maturity assessment. And then in the afternoon of that, because that's typically a morning exercise, in the afternoon, then we'll review the findings and we'll plot the shortfalls in a short, medium, or long-term agenda, but doing so against the processes in the kit.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go to day two, and having provided the client with a list of the 45 odd processes that we have to hand, we let them pick the top 12 and we light workshop them.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
we don't custom fit them necessarily for an organization to the point of implementation, but we give them thoughts and notes as to what they can do taking the kit forward. And then if there's any other processes not in that top 12 that have been highlighted as a shortfall of the work of day one, we run through those as well and we light workshop them as well. And then at the end of it all, the client gets a copy of the kit. So off the back of 2 days, a client knows where they are, where to go, and how to get there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, brilliant.
And if they want further help after that, then that's a conversation that we can have too.
Okay, fantastic, fantastic.
So I think it's a really accessible way of starting to structure how you tackle ITAM improvement.
Mhm.
You know, because it's only 2 days, it's not difficult to sell. There's not going to be weeks and weeks and weeks of consultancy that suddenly, you know, your senior managers might be concerned about. It is a very specific self-contained package.
Mhm.
So I think from that perspective, it's definitely something that ITAM practitioners could think about potentially doing it themselves. Because of course, now that the self-assessment service is available, publicly available through licenseware, you know, you can do the self-assessment service, get a copy of the kit. You could effectively do that yourself, but actually that really concentrated 2-day effort with the light workshopping of the processes, I think you just get so much out of it. So, you know, I think actually for me, that's a really star product that we offer, or that Rory offers. It's his, like I said, Rory's the ideas man. It's Rory's idea.
Fantastic. And I guess I do agree with you with regards to having someone to ask questions, even though small. A small question can often just connect the dots. So completely agree with any consulting and assistance from that perspective.
The nice thing is on it as well, Sean, is that I've run them in the past, obviously, and people say, what about my time? Can I dip in and out? Yes, you can, absolutely, because 9 times out of 10 we host them on Teams. Rarely have I done it on site. So if people are very busy, because people are very busy, then just dip in and out, and we can do that. We can structure the order of the processes to suit timelines and stuff. So yeah, my analysis and the light workshopping, that's all in 2 days. One thing we are going to come out with too in the fullness of time. I'm part of an organization called Clear Visibility who offer data cleansing services. So we're going to do a SAM Surgery Plus Plus. So there's a 3rd day then at that point, and we start to run data through some of the inventory processes and the data quality processes at that point then, so we can guide an organization on where they're weak and how we can get them to trustworthy data then off the back of the SAM Surgery Plus Plus.
Okay, brilliant. So I guess what we can do for the listeners here is we can provide all the links for the services within the body of the podcast or on YouTube. So please take a look at it, obviously check it out, and have a conversation with either Rory and Kylie about what they can do for you. I guess before we go, what takeaway do you have for the listeners?
I'd say engage the business, find out what the drivers are, and do something.
Yep.
Don't just sit there and look at it. That's the worst thing you can possibly do. Action beats inaction every time.
Proactive ITAM, always, always first.
Yeah, mine is actually more about AI and automation. We're moving into a world where things are becoming more and more automated, but you can't automate a bad process because you just end up with lots and lots and lots of bad results.
Yep.
So if you're thinking of automating, you need to spend some time and get those processes right. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble.
Thank you.
Yeah. And if you are interested in my perspective and point of view on how to apply AI to SAM as well, there's a paper on my website called AI, Machine Learning and SAM. Maybe that's another link we can drop into the chat there.
Good article, actually. I've read that. So thanks so much. Really appreciate you coming on the Off Menu podcast. And I'm sure the listeners enjoyed it too. Cheers.